This 14-year-old boy essayed his 91-year-old neighbor. On June 9th of 2024, a 91-year-old woman in Reddick, Florida woke up to find someone in her home. This person who broke into her home was identified as 14-year-old Jesse Stone. He attacked the woman, covered her face with a pillow so she couldn't see him, and essayed her. Later that night, the woman was taken to the hospital and she told investigators that someone had pounced on her, punched her in the face, essayed her, and then fled the scene. About a week later, authorities were able to identify Jesse using DNA evidence and he was arrested. Jesse told authorities that allegedly he had entered through the front door, he grabbed her iPad to watch inappropriate videos before getting the urge to essay her. Once investigators told the woman who had did this to her, she was shocked because Jesse was someone who would come by very often to talk with her and she considered him a good boy. During trial, Jesse's attorney pleaded on his behalf that he had a rough childhood and he suffers with depression and ADHD. He was also raised by his grandmother because he had no father figure and he was addicted to these adult websites. Jesse was found guilty and sentenced to 25 years in prison.
This children's daycare worker essayed children and joined a child pedo ring. Vanessa George was a 39-year-old mother of two who worked as a team leader at Little Ted's Day Nursery. Vanessa met Colin Blanchard on a dating app, and together they started discussing dark and twisted child SA fantasies. Vanessa SA'd the babies and the toddlers at the nursery by penetrating them and touching them. Some of the children that Vanessa SA'd were only a few months old. Vanessa took at least 124 explicit photos of the children at her daycare and sent them to Colin. Colin sent the inappropriate photos of the children to an online pedo ring. This ring included a woman named Angela Allen. The group discussed graphic details about SAing children and even joked about it. Vanessa was sentenced to a minimum of 7 years in prison, and Angela was sentenced to a minimum of 5 years in prison. But both of these women were granted parole after only serving 10 years each. Colin was sentenced to 9 years in prison and is currently still in prison. Okay, in my opinion, every single person who was involved in this case deserves life in prison. But what do you guys think about this case?
He offered her a ride home and ended up dismembering and partially consuming her remains. Lisa Hyder was 36 years old, a mother of 6, and already carrying more than what most people around her could see. She had health struggles, addiction issues, and a terminal diagnosis that shifted her entire future. That day, she was just trying to get home. Her phone was dying, and her ex-husband wasn't arriving anytime soon, so she needed a solution and she needed it fast. That's when she met Gregory Hale. At first, it seemed simple enough. He offered her a ride, but instead of taking her home, he drove to his parents' property in Summitville, where he lived in the garage. After the two have sex, things quickly turned deadly. Gregory later told investigators that he strangled her. After she was dead, he didn't run or even attempt to call for help. He stayed there and went through everything he planned, step by step. He used different tools to dismember her body, separating the remains and placing them in containers like he was simply cleaning up a mess. At some point, he even admitted to consuming her flesh. And just the way he explains it makes it worse. There's no remorse or emotion in his voice. And somehow, after all of that, he just went back to acting normal. He stayed on the property, around neighbors, even sitting down to eat with them while Lisa's remains were still nearby. That's the part that sickens me. How can someone commit something so brutal and then slip into their everyday life like nothing happened? The more people learned about Gregory, the darker the case became. Former co-workers said he had an obsession with death long before Lisa's murder. While working at a slaughterhouse, he reportedly collected animal remains, performed disturbing rituals, and fixated on serial killers like Richard Ramirez, who he actually exchanged letters with. Looking back, it's hard not to wonder how much of this was already living in his head before he ever met Lisa. Eventually, a tip led the police to the property, where they uncovered human remains and evidence of the nightmare Lisa endured. To avoid a death penalty trial, Gregory Hale pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and abuse of a corpse. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. What do you guys think about this case? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.
This little girl went missing in 2017, but she was just found alive after being recognized from a recent Unsolved Mysteries episode on Netflix. Kayla Unbehan was 9 years old when she was reportedly abducted by her mom in Wheaton, Illinois. She was last seen on the 4th of July on a camping trip while spending the holiday with her mom, who at the time only had certain visitation rights. Kayla's mom and dad separated just a few weeks after she was born, but what ensued was a lengthy and nasty custody battle. But when July 5th, 2017 came and Heather failed to return home with their daughter, Kayla was reported missing and a warrant was issued for Heather's arrest. But the two seemingly vanished into thin air. Over the years, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children kept releasing age-enhanced photos of Kayla in hopes of finding her. And just last year, her case was also featured on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries on Netflix about parents who've abducted their kids. But just last weekend, a store owner in Asheville, North Carolina recognized Kayla after having watched her episode on Netflix and called the police. And 6 years after her disappearance, Kayla has officially been located safe. Her mom, Heather, has been arrested and was charged with 1 count of child abduction. She's being held on a $250,000 bond while awaiting extradition to Illinois. On Kayla's 15th birthday earlier this year, her dad posted this tribute on the Facebook page dedicated to finding her, called Bring Kayla Home.
They forced 16 children to live in one bedroom, covered in bugs and feces. Gary Siders Jr. lived in a home with his mother, Christina Siders, his father, Gary Siders Sr., and his wife, Elizabeth Siders. Gary Jr. and Elizabeth had 16 children together. All 16 of their children were confined in one filthy 12-foot by 12-foot room. The whole house, including the children's one shared room, was absolutely disgusting. An official stated, "Most of our livestock was kept in better conditions than the children." The house had an insane bug infestation, so the children were covered in bugs and bug bites. The entire house was heavily contaminated with human feces and urine because there was only one bathroom and the children were not allowed to use it. The house was so packed with garbage that the investigators physically could not walk around. The children were never ever allowed to shower, so they were encrusted in layers of their own feces and urine. Almost all of the children barely even knew how to speak or write because they were never sent to school. Investigators had to put on protective face masks and gloves before entering the home because of the extreme biohazards within the house. All 4 of the adults were arrested very recently on June 30th of 2026, so they have not been sentenced yet. This is all honestly so disturbing and so devastating, but I really doubt that these people even feel an ounce of shame for what they've done. I really doubt that they even care. But what do you guys think about this case?
This is what I think happened in one of Reddit's most talked about disappearances. This case has so many questions, and this might be the only theory that answers all of them. If you're not already familiar with the disappearance of Bryce Lost Pizza, I've posted 2 TikToks and a YouTube video about it. You can find it on my profile. I had previously stated that Bryce was not a big partier, so it was strange when he started to abuse substances, but that might not have been the case. People that knew Bryce before his disappearance said that this was actually an issue that was going on for a while, and actually the reason that he got kicked out of his dorms his first year of college. If this is true, wouldn't his parents have known about it? And is it possible that they're keeping quiet on maybe some other issues that Bryce was having? People that knew Bryce also said that he was very stressed about the amount of influence his parents had on his life. Apparently, Bryce had no say in where he went to college, as well as other things in his life that were predetermined for him by his parents. So is it possible when he tried to give his expensive belongings to his roommate, this was actually some sort of rebellion against his parents? Have you ever had someone in your life that buys you things or does things for you only to hold them against your head later? Well, it's been suggested that this is how Bryce felt about his parents. Would also explain when people went to check on Bryce when he was just sitting for hours not wanting to go to his parents, why he did not want to get on the phone with his parents, like very adamantly did not want to talk to his parents. So is it possible that the important thing that Bryce wanted to talk to his parents about was him maybe standing up to them for the first time, but then just like later chickened out? The investigators on Bryce's case publicly changed their opinion on this case and now are very confident that he is alive and choosing to be missing. Is it possible that they're so confident that he is out there and choosing to be missing because they've already made contact with him and that's what he said? Also, this is not my theory about what happened to Bryce. I found this on Reddit from people that knew Bryce as well as other online sleuths that kept adding to it, trying to say like, oh, well, this explained this and this explained that if this was true. I did not include this theory when I first talked about this case on TikTok and YouTube because I've been like so invested in continuing to research after I posted this case because I cannot get it out of my mind. It's so strange. After everything I've learned, I truly do think that this is what happened to Bryce. In the comments, let me know if you believe this theory or if there's a theory you believe more.
So you like anything creepy, but have you heard of the case of Celine Delgado? There is a television network in Spanish called Canal 5 and they had a segment called Al Servicio a la Comunidad. This segment would come on around midnight and it would show missing people from the 90s to 2000s. In 2001, a photo of a missing girl named Celine Delgado Lopez, who was 18, showed up on this segment. There wasn't much information about this girl besides her name, age, and location of where she had went missing, which was in Mexico City. Some people found this odd because other people who were listed as missing on this segment had a full bio with greater detail. Viewers started to feel uneasy while watching this segment because as soon as her photo popped up on the screen, the TV channel freezes for a few moments and then this happens.
Selene Delgado López se ignora su paradero desde el 28 de mayo del año 2000.
Creepy, right? Fast forward to 2020 and there was a Facebook page with the name Celine Delgado Lopez. Many users who were familiar with this missing girl started to freak out because they realized that they were already added as her friend and couldn't remember adding her in the first place or even accepting the request. To make matters worse, they didn't even have the option to unfriend her, and many started to think that this Facebook page was haunted by Celine Delgado, while others thought it was just a complete hoax. Let me know what you guys think about this.
These kind of cases always make me just believe that Madeleine McCann is still alive. This woman was found alive and well after 63 years. It was the 7th of July 1962 in the small town of Reedsburg in Wisconsin. Audrey Backberg was just 20 years old, living with her husband and their 2 children. Now, despite being just 20 at the time, she and her husband had been married for 5 years. Yes, he got married to her when she was just 15. I'm not sure if or how this was legal. Now, the community was totally stunned when the young woman just completely vanished into thin air on the day in question. She'd been at home as normal that day, but left her house to go and pick up her paycheck. Now, this was a very normal thing back in the day. You didn't just get sent your pay money, you had to go and pick it up as a check. But she never returned home, which was obviously incredibly alarming. She had 2 children. People started wondering whether she'd met foul play on her walk back. The couple's 14-year-old babysitter said she'd last seen Audrey walking around the corner from the bus stop and then seemingly disappeared. No one had any idea why she would just voluntarily up and leave her 2 kids. The police were absolutely stumped after being unable to find her, and her husband, Ronald, passed a polygraph. They felt he had nothing to do with it, and the mystery rumbled on for a staggering 63 years until this year. It was an online ancestry account that essentially enabled police to put the missing pieces together. This account belonged to Audrey's biological sister and enabled police to track her down. It transpired that before she vanished, she had filed a report with police against her husband. She told officers how he'd beaten her up and threatened to kill her. Turned out she left of her own accord, got on a bus, and just went to start a new life. Her husband, after trying to find her and being unsuccessful, remarried at a later stage, and passed away in 2006. This lady is now 82, and after speaking with her on the phone, police confirmed that she just did her own thing, moved on, and started a new life. It's not clear whether she has reunited with her children, but she apparently has no regrets.
Kidnapped, outnumbered, and trapped behind a wheel, she realized her only escape might kill her, so she took it. It was just after midnight on July 26, 2017, when 20-year-old Jordan Dismore pulled into her apartment complex in Columbia, South Carolina. 3 armed teenagers ambushed her as she arrived home, forcing her to the ground within seconds. They shoved her into her own car and got in with her, thinking they had complete control. But there was one problem they didn't account for. The car was a stick shift, and they didn't know how to drive it. That detail alone shifted everything. Now Jordan wasn't just a victim anymore. She was the one behind the wheel of her own kidnapping. With the gun still pointed at her, she was ordered to drive. Every move was monitored. Every turn was dictated. They move her place to place until they reach an ATM where she's forced to withdraw $300. When she leans forward to complete the transaction, she secretly unbuckles her seatbelt. Not out of panic, but preparation. Because now the situation escalates. They're no longer just robbing her. They're talking about where she's going next. And what they got planned for her is something far worse. At that moment, Jordan makes a decision that may cost her life, but she knows she can't let them take her to a secondary location. So she starts studying everything. The road, the timing, the spacing of the cars. She waits, acting compliant, while waiting for the perfect opportunity to escape. Then the time comes. At roughly 35 miles per hour, she puts the car in neutral and jumped. The impact was painful, but Jordan was alive. A passing driver immediately stops and calls 911.
Please help me. I just got off work. They were hiding behind cars, and they jumped out with a gun, held it to my head, and then made me go to the ATM, the Wells Fargo, by the gas station, and take out money for them. And they took everything that I owned, everything that I had on me, and I had to jump out.
But behind her, the situation unravels. Her car veers off of the road into some bushes, forcing her attackers to flee on foot. Raquan Green, who was 17 at the time, was charged as an adult for kidnapping and armed robbery. The other 2, both 15, were charged as juveniles, with one facing attempted and assault on an officer. All 3 were ultimately convicted and sentenced to juvenile detention until the age of 21. But the courage Jordan showed during this whole ordeal was not only inspiring, but impactful. What do you guys think about this case? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.
Nobody ever talks about how to actually protect yourself. Everyone says the same basic stuff. Lock your door, carry your phone, don't walk alone, which you should definitely do those things. But listen, I run a true crime page with 500,000 followers, and I literally study this stuff every day. Nobody can predict every situation, but being prepared often shapes how you respond in these horrible situations. I know those late night walks across the quad can feel so freeing, and the campus parties are a blast. But with school back in session, it's also a really good time to start looking out for yourself and thinking ahead about your safety so nothing gets in the way of this new bit of freedom. And I bet you want to think that won't happen to me, but every single case I've covered, it's always just regular people who thought the same thing. So I'm gonna show you my top 3 self-defense items from Sabre that I genuinely recommend everyone to have. This right here is a pepper spray, and before you're like, okay, that's basic, all pepper sprays are the same. No, this one's different. For starters, it's got this quick grip design, so the second I grab it, I already know where the trigger is because of this P-loop design. When you're in a tense situation, every second counts. The quick grip design helps you act faster and with more confidence. Another reason I trust this pepper spray over any other is the distance that it sprays. You guys, it shoots up to 12 feet away, which means I don't have to be waiting until somebody's breathing down my neck to defend myself. And even if I'm shaking, that quick grip handle keeps it firm in my hand so I don't have to worry about it slipping. But the the cherry on top is the UV marking dye. Let's say I spray someone and they try to run away. Cops can shine a light on them and the spray turns purple, proving it was them. I literally couldn't even recommend a better pepper spray. And while we're on the topic of making sure you're safe, let me show you this. A door wedge stop alarm. For dorms, apartments, or even if you're traveling, this little wedge is like a built-in alarm system. If someone tries to open your door, this makes sure that you and everyone around knows about it. The alarm is 120 decibels. You can hear that up to 1,500 feet away. So if someone thinks they're being slick, they've got another thing coming, because now the whole building's awake. And if this isn't already amazing, it's got this non-skid pad underneath. So it's not just gonna sound an alarm, it's also gripping the floor and fighting to keep your door shut. Double the protection. And on top of the wedge alarm, there is also this compact travel door lock. Whether you're in a dorm, at home, or traveling, it's a simple way to add another level of protection. You just slide it in, click it down, and it reinforces the door with up to 650 pounds of force. Another safety product I always have on me is this little thing right here. It's a personal alarm. I clip it to my bag, and if anything ever goes wrong, all I have to do is pull it and it blasts an extremely loud siren that anyone within 1,200 feet can hear. Plus, it's got a built-in LED light, which means I'm not fumbling around in the dark anymore. It's tiny, simple, but honestly a lifesaver. So yeah, I know people will laugh and say that's extra or that'll never happen to me, but every case I've covered thought the same thing. And Sabre genuinely understood that, and they cared enough to give me a code so you can get 15% off if you use college15. I love y'all and I want you to be safe, so annoying you with a safety grant is better than seeing you end up as one of the cases I cover. I'll see you later. Group hug.
In 2016, 3 separate women were murdered while running alone in a span of just 8 days. These are their stories. On July 30th, 2016, 31-year-old Allie Bruger began her daily 10-mile run on her regular route in Rose Township, Michigan. She was found shot to death on Fish Lake Road not long after. During the investigation, police found shotgun casings at the crime scene and determined that the killer shot at Allie 4 times, hitting her once in the back as she likely tried to run away. Initially, police thought that Allie might have known her killer, and the focus at first was on her ex-boyfriend, who happened to fail a polygraph when asked if he killed her. His only alibi was that he was at home alone during the murder, but without any other evidence linking him to the crime, authorities couldn't charge him. Allie's family can't help but wonder if this was a failed abduction or if she possibly had a stalker since she ran the same route frequently. It's now been 7 years, and Allie's case is still unsolved. 3 days later, on August 2nd, 30-year-old Karina Vetrano would also be attacked, sexually assaulted, and murdered while running in New York. That day, Karina decided to go for a run in Spring Creek Park in Queens, which was less than a block away from her home. She would normally run with her dad for safety reasons, however, at the time, her dad had a back injury, so she decided to go alone. She was last seen alive at around 5 p.m. when entering the park, but when she stopped answering texts and calls, her dad notified authorities. A massive search was launched, and sadly, Karina's body would be found a few hours later by her father, face down about 15 feet off the trail. Her clothes had been pulled down, and her right leg was covered in scratches and bruises. Authorities determined that she had been hit in the back of the head with a rock, sexually assaulted, and died from strangulation. She had major defensive wounds, including cracked teeth, indicating that she bit her attacker incredibly hard. Her hands were found clutching grass as she was being dragged off the trail, and her killer's DNA was found underneath her fingernails and on her back. Authorities ran the DNA through a national database, however, it provided no leads, and her case would go cold for 6 months. But eventually, 20-year-old Chanel Lewis would be arrested for her rape and murder after his DNA matched what was found at the scene. He confessed to the crime and reportedly had a hatred for women, even telling a teacher years prior that he wanted to stab all the girls at his school. Chanel was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Just 5 days later, yet another woman would be sexually assaulted and killed while out on a walk by herself. On August 7th, 27-year-old Vanessa Marcotte left her mom's home and went for a walk in Princeton, Massachusetts, but she never came back. A massive search was launched, and sadly, Vanessa's body would be found hours later on a trail in a heavily wooded area less than half a mile from her mom's home. She was found nude and suffered from burns on her face, hands, and feet, and she had also been sexually assaulted and strangled. It was so bad that her throat had been crushed and her nose had been broken. Her clothes, phone, and AirPods were all missing from the scene, but authorities were able to recover DNA from her killer. According to witnesses, Vanessa was last seen alive at around 1 p.m. walking and talking on the phone, but a black SUV was also seen following her. Witnesses were able to give a description of the man driving the car, but Vanessa's case would go cold for nearly a year. Finally, in April of 2017, a state trooper stopped 31-year-old Angelo Ortiz in his black SUV and noticed that he matched the description. Angelo voluntarily submitted his DNA and it came back as a match. He had no prior criminal history and was married with 3 children at the time of Vanessa's murder. He was also a third-party contractor with FedEx and was described as extremely perverted. Along with his DNA matching, his phone records confirmed that he was in the area of the crime scene at the time of the murder. Angelo was charged with Vanessa's murder and sentenced to life in prison. He'll be eligible for parole in 45 years. They deserved to feel safe.
Imagine being in a hotel room with your friends having fun, having no idea you just killed somebody in the room next door to you. This was a total stranger and the room was locked. You'd never even seen this person nor gone in their room. I promise you this is the craziest story you'll hear all week. It was the evening of the 15th of September 2010. Greg Flanagan was a 55-year-old man from Lafayette in Louisiana. He often traveled for work and this evening was no different. He was staying in room 348 of the Elegante Hotel in Beaumont, Texas. He had a loving wife, Susie, who he regularly spoke with while he was away. The pair spoke every single day and they spoke on the day in question and nothing seemed amiss. He was having a super chilled night. He was lying on the bed, he was eating snacks, he was actually watching Iron Man 2 apparently, and I've heard that's a pretty good film, so he must have been enjoying his evening. He was smoking and drinking like he normally did, but he never got to see how the film ended, because suddenly, out of nowhere, he was killed. The next morning, Susie, his wife, was really worried. She hadn't heard from her husband that morning, which was very strange because they always spoke to each other when they woke up. Strangely, Greg wasn't answering his phone, so she raised the alarm with Greg's colleagues who drove over to the hotel and banged on his door. But they unfortunately got no answer. Why wasn't Greg answering the door? And when they tried it, it was locked. When they convinced the hotel manager to open the door with the master key, what they found inside that room stunned them. Greg was dead. His body lay face down on the rug on the floor. He had no obvious signs of what had happened to him. There was nobody else in that room and the door had been locked. There was no signs of a struggle or a break-in, not even any blood or injuries on Greg himself. Now, due to the beer, the snacks, the lack of obvious signs of foul play, investigators pretty quickly presumed that this had been a natural causes thing, maybe an instant heart attack. But what was found at the autopsy was absolutely mind-blowing. In a completely unexpected turn of events, the coroner announced that Greg's internal injuries had been catastrophic. This was certainly not a natural causes death. His internal damage was so horrific that it indicated he'd either been beaten to death or been crushed. He suffered severe trauma. This included broken ribs and a hole in his heart. This was clearly a murder. Investigators determined something incredibly violent had happened to this man, but had left virtually no trace. Greg was a really nice guy. He had no enemies. He kept himself to himself. Nobody knew any reason why anyone would want to hurt him. He'd obviously, like I said, been in his hotel room on his own, and it had been locked from the inside. They knew they needed to scour the hotel to try and find who was responsible and what on earth had gone on here. The investigators initially spoke with guests at the hotel at the time of the murder and nobody seemed to have seen anything. Nobody had spoken to Greg, seen him, heard a struggle, nothing. And shockingly, it would be somebody who'd never even laid eyes on Greg who was responsible for his killing. Nearly 2 years went by with no answers until Susie, his wife, felt she had to take matters into her own hands. She hired a private investigator and they decided to reconstruct his final moments in that hotel room. By doing so, they suddenly spotted a clue nobody else had seen. This was a tiny, tiny hole in the wall, just big enough for a bullet. In the room next door, there was a matching hole, but this one had been covered up, almost like patched up, with toothpaste. Turned out 3 electricians from Wisconsin had been staying in the room next door to Greg the night he was killed. This included Tim Steinmetz and Lance Muller. On the night of Greg's death, they'd been drinking and watching sports. Investigators interrogated them about what really happened that evening, and one of them admitted something. Tim told officers Lance had been drunk and pulled out a weapon and had been messing around with it, and the weapon discharged. The bullet went through the wall, and in a panicked state, they just covered it up with toothpaste. The gunshot had killed Greg, so why wasn't there signs of a gunshot on him? Well, bizarrely, the skin where the bullet had entered had kind of sealed itself back up because it was such thin skin, because it had entered via his back door, if you get what I'm saying. Lance pleaded no contest to manslaughter and was given 10 years in prison. Greg's wife actually stated that Lance had seen Greg's body being removed from that room in a body bag the following day. She's adamant that he knew he had accidentally killed Greg and he just decided to cover it up.
After nearly 30 years and so many strange details in the JonBenét Ramsey case that point to the family being involved, a huge amount of people still think an intruder was responsible. So what exactly would the timeline of that night look like if an intruder was responsible? Quickly, I'm gonna go over the timeline that has already been given by the family and then piece in where the intruder theory would fit in. On the evening of December 25th in 1996, JonBenét Ramsey's family said that she fell asleep in the car leaving a Christmas party at a family friend's house, and then they put her to bed around 10 p.m. I scoured the internet to find when the parents said they went to sleep that night. Could not find like an exact time, but I'm assuming since it was Christmas and a busy day, it wouldn't be too far after JonBenét went to bed at 10 p.m. 12 a.m., a neighbor noticed that the kitchen light was on in the Ramsey home. 2 a.m., another neighbor says they heard a scream coming from the Ramsey home, and that neighbor's husband said that shortly after the scream, he heard a noise that sounded like metal on concrete. Years later, the same neighbor backtracked on the statement that she heard a scream, saying that she might have heard it on a different night. At 5:30 a.m., Patsy Ramsey, the mother of JonBenét Ramsey, woke up to make coffee, found the ransom note on the stairs, and her daughter missing. 15 minutes later, Patsy Ramsey called some of her family friends, and then at 5:52 a.m., Patsy finally called 911 to report her daughter missing. Very shortly after that, investigators started showing up on the scene. Patsy Ramsey was wearing the same clothes that she was seen wearing at the Christmas party the following night. And the family friends that she had called before calling 911 were also at the scene, amongst other people that started showing up that were close to the family. At 10:30 a.m., the father of JonBenét Ramsey, John, went missing for at least an hour to pick up the mail, even though the mail had already been delivered through the slot in the front door. At 1:05 p.m., John, the father of JonBenét Ramsey, and one of the family friends that Patsy had called over before calling 911 found JonBenét's body in the basement of the home. JonBenét's time of unaliving is said to be around 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., but due to some details, it is believed that her time of unaliving is closer to the beginning of that time frame. It could be highly debated whether or not the kitchen light being on at 12 a.m. was from the intruder or from the family maybe cleaning up from, Christmas Day. But for the sake of argument, let's just say that it was her family just cleaning up in the kitchen and that they went to bed maybe shortly after. The intruder would have had to sneak into the home, I'm assuming shortly after 12 a.m., sneak into JonBenét's room to take her out of her bed and then cause the blunt force trauma. Then the intruder would have had to write the 2.5-page ransom note with stationery that was found in the home, so they have to find the stationery and then write this ransom note. We are unsure how long it took whoever wrote the ransom note to write it, but online, people that have copied it said it took them around 20 minutes. But for the most accurate information in this video, I decided to test that myself, and I actually timed myself writing the ransom note. And not only did I do that, I made my boyfriend write it as well as I timed him. Due to how long the ransom note was, we both had to take time to stop writing and shake out our hands because it was hurting our hands to write that long, and it only took us about 14 minutes. So 14 to 20 minutes is an already long time to write a ransom note in the house when you could be caught at any moment, but you have to understand that this is someone who's copying the note, not even thinking about what they're going to write next. So I would assume it took whoever wrote this note probably 45 minutes to 30 minutes to write this ransom note. We can debate why an intruder would choose to write that long of a ransom note while they could be caught at any moment, but what I want to discuss is why they would even risk it if the person they're writing the ransom note for has already been unalived. Now reportedly, the actual cause of JonBenét's unaliving was a garrote, which had been used anytime between 45 minutes to 2.5 hours after the first head injury. The garrote was also made from materials that were found in the home, so now they're risking even more time to find and make the garrote. And they would have to sneak out undetected before Patsy woke up at 5:30. So if we're meant to believe the timeline that was given by family, that meant that at the very, very most, the intruder had 5.5 hours to do all of this while being undetected. So a time frame of 5.5 hours that the intruder had snuck in as soon as JonBenét's parents went to bed and snuck out right before JonBenét's mother woke up. And is this possible? I mean, yes. But is it likely? I mean, that's for you to decide. I really want to know what you think in the comments. But like, again, why would an intruder risk doing all of that? The ransom note is the biggest detail that confuses me the most because it is like the biggest proof of a staged kidnapping I have ever seen. I forgot exactly how bizarre this note was until I had to copy it myself. So if you want to see a deep dive on that, I would probably make that video. I also have a whole series on here on what I personally think happened to JonBenét, so if you want to find it, it's in a playlist on my profile.
And then it clicked. All of this was connected. They had a serial killer on their hands and they needed to find him fast. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, described as a psychotic, paranoid, Satan-worshipping psychopath who derived his pleasure from the combination of lust and violence. As far as we know, he was 24 years old when he first ended a life, but before his 26th birthday, he would take at least 13 more lives and at least 30 victims, making people in Southern California in the 1980s fear for their life. I honestly don't know how I have not done a video on him yet, but I was researching the details and I was scared, and you will be too. Also, I feel like I look dirty today. If I do, honestly, none of my business. Don't let me know. Anyway, let's get into it. Richard Ramirez was born and raised in El Paso, Texas. He was the baby, the youngest of 5 children, but the environment that those kids grew up in was not good. He grew up around violence. The family faced a lot of challenges. It was a very unstable household. Emotional trauma, physical trauma, you name it. His father was not a nice man. I think Richard probably feared his dad from a very young age. And to seek a father figure in somebody else, he turned to his older cousin, Mike. Mike had served in the Vietnam War. Why can't I say that? Vietnam War, where he saw and committed a lot of violence, and he would tell all of his stories to Richard. Mike, holding a lot of his own trauma, is telling this young boy stories about how he would treat Vietnamese women. He would tell Richard about how he would tie them up to trees, S.A. them, even once showing Richard a picture of him with a severed human head of a woman that he had tortured. And Richard, being so young at the age where his brain is still developing, he looks up to this cousin of him who does all these terrible things. He idolizes his cousin, and he thinks that because he treats women like they're objects, not human beings, he's violent to women because they don't matter. Richard's brain is wired to think that hurting people is okay. When Richard was 13 years old, he witnessed that same cousin Mike get in an argument with his wife, grab a weapon, and end her life. Richard saw it happen. He saw it with his own 2 eyes. And in a sick and twisted way, it just kind of made him look up to his cousin even more and respect him for it. Mike was charged for that, of course, but he was found not guilty by reason of insanity, and he was released 4 years later. But that event, in my opinion, shapes the way that Richard views women and worships violence, and it brings those two things together, resulting in the origin of who Richard would grow up to be. When he was around 17 years old, Richard had become a social outcast. He didn't socialize much, he didn't really care about himself, and he started behaving really strangely. His morals were in all the wrong places. He began sleeping in graveyards. He grew an obsession with the devil and worshiping the devil, and he was just heading down a bad path. When he was 18 years old, he moved from Texas to California, and 5 years later, when he was 24 years old, he would commit his first murder that we know of. On June 28th of 1984, a boy named Jack went to go visit his mom at her apartment in LA. When he walked in, he noticed that the front door was unlocked, a window screen was missing, and the house looked like it had been ransacked. He then found the body of his mom, Jenny Vinco, deceased. She had wounds of a weapon all over her body, a large incision across her neck, almost to the point where her head was barely hanging on. Her dress was pulled up and there was blood everywhere. 6 months after that, Richard was actually arrested for a car theft, but they had no reason to believe that he was the person who committed that murder. So he only spent 36 days in prison, and then he was released. Not long after he was released, in March of 1985, he struck again. By the way, this is something that my mom told me. My mom is a psychologist. This is something she said when I asked her why people do things such as this. What makes a human being do that to another human being? And my mom said that people like Richard Ramirez are numb. They are unable to feel. They are unable to build relationships with women, but they still want something to do with women. They want to be able to feel something, and in order to satisfy that, they will do the most awful things like end someone's life because they do something so awful in hopes of being able to feel something, anything at all, and they don't care at what expense. Does that make sense? I don't know. Within a 10-day period in March of 1985, Richard attacks 5 more times, leaving only 1 victim alive. Then another 8 people deceased, another 4 attacked, homes being broken into, any victim, any gender, any age, any method of ending their lives, any weapon, any kind of torture, any means of violence. What was going on? It was terrifying. The entire state of California was was in fear, and for that exact reason, officers didn't know that all of these crimes were being committed by the same person, but they were starting to suspect it because of how brutal they all were, but they did not know for sure because he didn't have a specific victim type, a specific routine, or way of ending their lives. His MO was all over the place. Then he goes to San Francisco to minimize the chances of him getting caught, and for the very first time there, he takes a life outside of LA. He breaks into the house of a husband and a wife. He fires at the husband, 66-year-old Peter, while he was sleeping, leaving him unalived in bed. The wife, 62-year-old Barbara, had been SA'd, also fired at, but she was still alive when officers got there, so she was immediately rushed to the hospital. At that crime scene, a satanic symbol was carved into the wall. The intruder also went into the fridge, ate some food that was in there, threw up the food, and then did things to himself, if you know what I mean, relieving himself on their carpet. I don't know, disgusting. Wait, I'm also not going very much into detail about every single crime scene because there are so many, but it's important that you know how brutal they were. At one of them, he carved the eyeballs out of his victims, put them in a little jewelry box, and took them with him. Yeah. No words. Sick, sick, sick. August 18th of 1985, officers in San Francisco put out an alert off that attack, including a description of the weapon that was used. An officer in LA sees that and says, wait, our crimes here have also been committed using that kind of weapon. And that's when they start thinking, is this the same guy? And that is when he got the name The Night Stalker. Richard broke into another house in the middle of the night. The couple whose house it was not home, but their little niece was. When she heard someone breaking in through the window, she ran downstairs and hid in a closet. The intruder never found her, luckily, but he did steal a lot of things from that house, including a bracelet. That bracelet had a serial number written on it, and that same bracelet ended up in another part in California. Officers questioned the guy who had the bracelet. After some time, the guy came clean and said the friend that sold him the bracelet was named Richard Ramirez. There were also two other things that played a big part in connecting all of this to Richard. A victim survived. Richard had attacked her thinking that she was no longer alive, but before he left, he looked at her and said, "Tell them you've met the Night Stalker," and she was able to give a very good description of him to police officers. They also found a fingerprint in a vehicle that was stolen by the Night Stalker. So now they had a name, a fingerprint, and a sketch of him. There were a total of 8 different people named Richard Ramirez with fingerprints in police records. Only one of them was a perfect match, and just like that, his mugshot from years ago was splattered all over the media. Richard, not knowing that police were after him, takes a bus back to LA. He gets off the bus, he sees his face on the front page of a newspaper, books it, he starts running. Locals see him, they recognize him, they start chasing after him, they attack him and pin him down long enough for police officers to arrive. After 14 months of fear, finally, the Night Stalker was in custody. He was charged with 13 murders and 5 attempted murders. His victims were aged between 16 and 83 years old. 3 were male, 15 were females. In court, he pleaded not guilty, but before he left the courtroom, he raised his hand to show a drawing of a pentagram on his palm and said, "Hail Satan," as he exited the room. The trial didn't happen until 3 years after his arrest, but he was found guilty on all charges and he was sentenced to 19 death penalties. Richard, as well, like Ted Bundy, had so many female fans, girls that loved him, that thought that he was so handsome. Girls would send him letters to prison. One specifically wrote him 75 letters. And in 1988, Richard proposed to her and they got married in the prison that he was being held at. At 53 years old, Richard Ramirez passed away in 2013 while awaiting execution. He had spent a total of 23 years on death row. Are you gonna have nightmares? Because I am. Anyway, let me know what your thoughts are on this. That is all I have for today. And again, I don't know what's gonna happen with TikTok. I don't want to talk about it. It's gonna stress me out. I'm kind of in denial, I think. But should TikTok disappear, make sure that you're following me on Instagram because I will post these videos on my Instagram. My Instagram is linked in my bio. Hope you guys are all having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy. And I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
I honestly think this could take the top prize of the strangest circumstances regarding a missing person's disappearance and reappearance that I have ever heard. Imagine this: a 63-year-old Romanian cattle seller vanishes completely after going on a normal business trip in 1991. 30 years later, a car pulls up at his family home. Out steps the now 93-year-old man that went missing all those years ago, wearing the exact same clothes that he left in perfect condition. He was still carrying the original train ticket that he bought on the day that he went missing. This is the unsolved mystery of Vasil Gorgos. In 1991, in a small farming village in eastern Romania, lived a man called Vasil Gorgos. He was born in 1928 and he was a well-known cattle farmer and trader. He done this all of his life. He was an expert and he spent most of his his time travelling to different areas, buying cattle and coming home. Essentially, his whole life revolved around buying and selling livestock. Short business trips were completely normal for him. He'd hop on a train, close a deal and come back within a day or two. His family always knew that he was going to be home within a couple of days. One morning in 1991, 63-year-old Vasile told his family that he was heading out for another business trip. He bought a train ticket and walked out the door, but he never came back. This was really unexpected for the family. As I said, he tended to go for a day or two, but he would always come home. The days turned into weeks and there was still no sign of him. The family reported him missing, the police searched, there was volunteers combing the area, but there was no witnesses, no body, and no leads. The years passed and the family had begun to accept that they would never see him again. The case had went completely cold, and then the family, on the day that he went missing every year, decided to hold a memorial service for him. They believed Vasile was dead, that he had came to harm or he had died somewhere. For nearly 3 whole decades, they lived with that grief of losing him and never really knowing where he went. That was until the 29th of August 2021. Almost exactly 30 years later, something completely impossible and out of the blue happened. It's important to note just before I go on to this bit that the family that he owned, lived on and worked on was still in the family at this point in time. It hadn't been sold on, which I think in this case is so lucky, because if it had, I don't know what the outcome would have been. On that August day, a car pulls up outside that family farm. An elderly man stepped out, looking confused and very disorientated. Before anyone could get a look at the driver or the license plate or even have a good look at the car sped away into the distance. The man approached the family and it was 94-year-old Vasile Gorgos. He was wearing the exact same clothes that he wore the day he disappeared in 1991. In his pockets was his old identity card and the original train ticket from 1991, still completely intact. It hadn't tattered over time, it hadn't discoloured, it looked completely untouched. His family were obviously absolutely flabbergasted. They thought he was dead. They were holding yearly memorial services for him. They had accepted that he was gone, he had died, and now he was standing in front of them. When they asked the completely obvious question to Vasile of where have you been for the last 30 years, Vasile's answer was chilling, to say the least. He answered their question with, I've been home. He remembered his early life. He knew he was born in 1928. He remembered the wife he had that had died. He knew he was the son of a successful merchant. He recognised the house and the farm and he remembered having kids. However, the 3 decades that he was gone, his mind was completely blank. It's as if he remembered everything from before his disappearance. He can't remember disappearing, and he can't remember any of the time that's elapsed in between that. He can only remember his life up until then, and then it's as if he is still living there. He struggled to recognise his own children, as I'm going to assume 30 years had passed and they would have looked a lot different as to when he last saw them. When they tried to push harder and question Vasile more about all of those missing years, he would just talk about raising and selling cows, just as if no time had passed whatsoever. His son would later tell local media, quote, "We don't understand him. He doesn't know what he's saying. We ask him one thing and he tells us another. Who knows where he has been? Who kept him? Or maybe he was forced to work. Who knows what kind of life he has had." Doctors examined Vasile. Obviously, you would have to examine somebody after coming back after that long. For being a 93-year-old man though, his physical health was remarkably good. The only major issue was that massive gap in memory for 30 years, and they also noted he had some slight neurological problems, but that would be consistent with his age. So, what happened to Vasile for those 30 years that he was gone? No one knows, and because it appears that he has no memory of it, we might never know. There has been so many theories on what could have happened going about online, so let me tell you some of them, and please let me know down below in the comments which one you think is the most likely. I am going to be honest, in this case, I have absolutely no idea where I stand, and I mean no idea. I think any of these could 100% be possible. The first theory is that he abandoned his family to start a new life with with someone else possibly? Did he have another family? When he got too old or that situation ended, did he get somebody to bring him home? It is definitely possible, however, there was media appeals for when he went missing and there was searches done. Surely somebody somewhere would have recognised him. That is the only thing that throws me off this theory a little bit. There's also claims that he was potentially arrested under a different identity and spent decades in prison and then refused to admit it. This doesn't really make sense to me either. If he was arrested under his own name, obviously when he went missing that would have been checked. I don't understand under what circumstance that he would be arrested under another identity. Surely as well, if the police knew he was missing and they saw his photo, they would be able to match that up with somebody who was in prison. I might be wrong about that because it was in the 90s, but I'm not sure. A huge theory that I think is one of the most plausible ones in this case is that he was kidnapped or taken and forced into labour and was only released or dumped when he was no longer useful or able to work. Perhaps he had a lot of trauma from that time and he's blanked it out. However, surely he would remember something, or maybe he doesn't want to get the people in trouble who took him. I definitely think that is a very plausible theory, but again, I just don't know. There could also be a medical explanation. It could have either been an extreme dissociative amnesia or a very rare neurological event that's completely wiped him out. Then my question in this theory is, where did he go that full time and how did nobody recognise him? There is obviously some more out there theories online, for example, government experiments, cult involvement, or even alien abductions, but I think in this case, this is one of those ones that I think anything is possible. I honestly don't have the answer for you. I wish I did. And the fact that he gives absolutely nothing away, I don't know where my mind goes. As far as I'm aware, he is still alive. Vasil Gorgos is living with his family again in the farm in that remote village. The case remains as a complete mystery. The local media in Romania reported on this in 2021 and then it spread internationally. The family obviously still have more questions than answers, and I think everyone who reads about this case goes away from it having more questions than answers. That man walked out the door in 1991 with a train ticket in his pocket. He walked back in 2021 wearing the same clothes and the same tickets with 3 decades just erased from his brain. I think the weirdest part of this case, when I've looked into it, that I just can't wrap my head around, regardless of what the theory was, is that his clothes were still in perfect condition and the train ticket being in perfect condition. I have bits of paper from a few weeks ago that are in bad condition, so these must have been preserved very well. That would maybe make me lead into the question of, was he arrested and just given the stuff that he came in with? But would we not know that if he was reported missing? Please let me know your theories down below. I would love to hear what you guys think because this case has honestly just stumped me. Thank you all so much for being here. I will see you in the next one and look after yourself.